Hello, class. Welcome back. Specifically, this is Thursday, week two, class 2 of week two. We're going to discuss a little bit more of a outlook into risk mitigation planning, and this time we're going to go a little bit more in depth as far as the work breakdown structure and kind of the organization of how you would create a plan of attack or I guess, a hierarchical timeline of how you would actually work through a risk mitigation after you do the assessment. Last class we focused on more of the assessment, all the things that can go wrong, the mitigation that can kind of go into, and build this really nice metrics that you can actually use to create documentation and a plan of action, so to speak. And that's what we would move into when you're starting to create the work breakdown structure of WBS. And today we're going to go a little more in detail of exactly how you would do that and how you would set up a work breakdown structure. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get in the mood for risk to start with. And like we discussed last class, we talked specifically about risk avoidance, acceptance, transference, and mitigation, and the four different ways of attacking risk in general. The most optimal thing that you can potentially do is, of course, avoid any type of risk that can come up, and that would be, completely being able to get rid of any of that potential risky situation even coming up within the project. So if there's a way to avoid that completely, then you go that route and take care of it. Just the most ridiculous hypotheticals is like, let's say a risk is getting hit by a car for the project. Well, guess what we can do? We can not do the project in the road. Maybe we can do it somewhere where there's not cars actively moving, and then that risk will be avoided almost completely. Pretty rudimentary and stupid, but you guys kind of get the picture. If you're able to pretty much just detach any of that risk completely in there, that's going to be the most optimal and easiest way to do, but a lot of times you can't do that. And then there's always acceptance, which is meaning that there's going to be risk in almost any project that you go into. Like, let's say hypothetically, risk of failure. That's always going to be a situation, right? Every project you start can potentially have a fail that may or may not be on your shoulders, depending on all the different circumstances that can go wrong. That's going to be an acceptance, and then going into the mitigation of how you can kind of stop that from happening or mitigate the risk of it actually going out. We also talk about transference, which is instead of accepting the risk, you can't avoid it, but you can transfer it to a different scenario or delegate it out, so that way it's not something that's directly on your plate and something you have to handle directly. And then of course, what we talked about when we go to the metrics tool is mitigation itself, which is putting proactive plans in places or reactive plans in place that will be triggered or put up preemptively to stop certain risks from either being detrimental from happening in general, or just from being huge delays and problems with the project overall. And that's that portion of it. Now, remember to always do a risk assessment. Like we talked about and actually walked through last class. We did one of these specifically for your assignment, the Tough Mudder, which again you got talked into, hypothetically of course, you got talked into doing a Tough Mudder, which is a pretty extreme, tough, um, you know, physical activity of running through a lot of mud and obstacles for a very long duration of time. Um, but anyway, so remember, always do a risk assessment, and the reason being is just straight accountability. When you're developing the actual tool itself, or actually going through the risk assessment, make sure that you're dubbing out accountability of exactly what's going to be happening and delegating the proper responsibilities. You always have the right people in the room to give more insight to all the different variable risks that can possibly happen in the project. Like I've talked about with you guys in the first week, there's things in place that you may or may not have 100% great understanding within from the project managerial role that you're in. You might not have a certain knowledge or expertise in certain areas of the project, but your employees or subordinates do. And so you're going to need those expert opinions or those knowledge-based opinions to build out a proper risk assessment of things that can happen, because they're going to have a completely different idea and variable of risks that are associated with their specific part of the project. So you want to make sure you have the right people in the room with that. And of course, use this assessment form or a version of it in some way, shape, or form to actually go through that process and make it work that way. Now, let's talk about the WBS in general. So I don't want to harp too much on the risk assessment, because we did a pretty thorough job of it on Tuesday, going through it, and actually I live demoed actually walking through the scenario, and most of you probably have played with it already by now, this far up in the week. If you haven't, you still have time, but and make sure you do that. And also, just a side note, that risk assessment tool is within your file section. It's a downloadable Excel doc you can simply just click on. It's also built into the Canvas assignment itself. Just click on it and download it. It'll pop up. You can just plug and play it right then and there. Makes it much easier. Anyway, so back to the work breakdown structure. So WBS is short for work breakdown structure. I'm sorry for the missing quote, whatever, no big deal. Anyway, the WBS is built for specifically, and I guess the technical thing that it's describing is that this is a deliverable-oriented hierarchical decomposition of work to be executed. I know what you're thinking. Wow, that's a very prestige use of words to explain a outline, so to speak. Well, yes, but it makes you sound very highly intelligent, and with it, if you can actually deliver that passage of exactly what a WBS is. But anyway, long story short, you are almost in every project scenario when you're taking a lead and you're actually like divvying out work and you're going to be project planning, you're going to build out a version of the WBS. And there's different variances of how it looks and what it works off of based on your own personal preference, of course, whatever is easier for you to keep track of, because this is something that you use specifically to kind of keep track of all the different work, the people that are going to be assigned to it, the starting and end dates, a whole different version of like the levels and systems that go into it. And it's a hierarchical based structure of like what needs to be done first, second, last, and in certain durations. And it's pretty much just a giant blueprint of how this project is going to move as far as the sequence is what's going first, what's going last, and moving through the process. You also are going to use this, excuse me, as a tool to explain and show any superiors or financiers or anybody that's, I guess, above you, so to speak, what the project is also going to entail, and allows you to be able to build out resources, get certain personnel in place, and a bunch of other things that go with it. So it means this, and this is one version of it. Now, I'll make it even easier. You've all probably heard the term, eating an elephant one bite at a time. And I always have a disclaimer out there: don't actually try to eat an elephant. They're sweet animals, and if you do, hostile, they may kill you. But anyway, and there's no reason to actually eat elephants, so don't do that. But it's one bite at a time, so that you want to approach a WBS, the work breakdown structure, and the outline, and so to speak, in a couple, like a step scenario, step by step of what exactly needs to get done. So you think of any rudimentary project as far as the simplicity or the more detailed craziness that can go with it. So if you take like a simple example, let's say, you're just putting gas into your car, so to speak. All right, so if I was creating a WBS based off of just the simplicity of putting your gas in a vehicle, it would be pretty rudimentary, right? It would be you drive to a gas station that's within range, you park the car and turn the car off. You may or may not have to hit a certain switch or button in order to open the flap that your gas reservoir is open to, or a gas tank has the access to. You get out, you pay at the pump, most likely, for exactly what you're going to need in gas, and then you take the pump out and you pump the gas, you finish, put it back, and drive away, right? Closing everything up and doing that. Now, if you were to build an outline version of that, you can kind of just picture in your head, it'd be pretty much like 8 steps max as far as how that's going to go, and it might kind of break it off into it. So anyway, but that's how you're going to build out projects. You need to be that granular sometimes as far as exactly all the different steps you're going to take to get into it. So you might be asking yourself, well, why do I actually have to build this WBS? Like, what's the purpose if I can just kind of keep track of the versions of it in my head? Well, the first thing is to assist with the accurate project organization. Because let's be honest, the more intricate, the more people, the more delegation, the more hands in the pot, so to speak, or the amount of subordinates that you have to work with, keeping track of all of that is going to be borderline impossible for an average regular person, or even highly intelligent craziness person. You need some kind of documentation to back it up and go with it. Not to mention, you're going to need some kind of step-by-step process to ensure that you're covering every angle of the project, because you might be focusing on high level and you miss certain granular things or steps that have to get going. And if you miss, and sometimes you can get away with skipping steps or missing certain things, but a lot of times you can't. And if you miss certain steps, you might have to go back and repeat the whole process based on the circumstances. So anyway, it assists with the accurate project organization. You need it for that specific reason for you personally. It helps you assign direct responsibility and accountability to whoever or whomever you're going to be actually addressing this responsibility to, whether it's one of your subordinates, whether it's you, whether it's a different department of organization, it's an outsourced contract that's happening. You pretty much can see a quick snapshot and get a brief description of exactly what the project is at hand and the responsibility that's assigned to that specific task. It also allows you to show any type of controls and milestones that need to get done. Now, eventually the WBS transitions to a more of a living document that's both the WBS and eventually the Gantt chart, which goes over the progression of certain aspects of the project, which we'll go over a little bit later. But as far as like WBS, it gives you very, very streamlined controls and milestones of exactly where things need to get taken care of. Because typically, in how we're going to build out a work breakdown structure, and we're going to do the live actually build out at the end of this lecture, is there's going to be starting, ending, and starting, ending portions of certain projects that are going to have to get assigned to it. So certain times when you're building out a WBS, there's going to be certain sequences of things that have to get done before other ones actually start, right? You can't actually start a certain kind of project without having certain steps taken care of in the front end. So you want to make sure that you are assigning those tasks, having a description, but also having the control factors that like, look, we can't move on to this second sequence or these set of projects until this first set of like 10 or whatever projects, mini projects are done. Then we can move on to the next step. Otherwise, they're not going to coincide, or we don't have the proper tooling or the platforming or whatever needed being to kind of move through that, right? So just think about it. If we're building a vehicle, like we talked about in the first class, if we didn't build the chassis and didn't have the setup for the vehicle in the first place, we couldn't just drop the engine in without having it created, correct? So that's the kind of thing as far as the controls and milestones that need to get done. So if your engine team finishes the engine and hooks the tranny to it, and then it has like the block ready to go, you can't do anything with it until the rest of the vehicle is ready to go so you can drop it into it, correct? You can't just like jam it in there even though you don't have the chassis done or you don't have the setup for it. So it's a similar type of situation. Like no matter, there's got to be controls and milestones that you fulfilled in order to do that. All right, so I'm pretty sure I've been harping on that. You got it, all right? Now, it also gives you more accurate estimates for cost, risk, time, and scope. So when you're looking, pretty much from go, you're gonna, after the risk assessment, after the gold card and all that various stuff, when you build out a WBS, this allows you to assign the risk mitigation plan to go with the assessment. It allows you to differentiate the costing that goes with each individual project and portion of this work breakdown structure. And then also helps you define the time and scope that go into it, because you can start to allocate starting and end times for each one of these depictions of the project. And it starts to build out this really, really nice, robust estimate of cost and time and the overall scope of the project, right? So this is where it goes from, because pretty much when you start to go through the phases of project development or project management in general, like I said, like we talked about in the beginning, it starts with a problem. Once you have that problem, you start to disseminate the problem into actionable steps. You start to kind of ballpark it in your head. You build out an outline, a rudimentary plan of action as far as like what you want to have happen in a perfect scenario or in the hindsight of the big picture, right? Then you have to start getting more granular and start documenting and start stepping this process. And that's when it goes into the risk assessment as far as like all the different parts of this moving project that can go wrong based off of the original planning portion of it. Then you start to conceptualize it into a very, very detailed structure, work breakdown structure that's outlined and actually can be utilized to do the rest of the portions of it as far as the costing and the timing allocated for the actual project, and also delegating work eventually, which eventually turns into project Gantt charts and management and going over the timetables, which we'll discuss later on as the weeks follow. But also a great tool for it, because these things are essential for you as a project manager, but also when it comes to explaining things to your stakeholders. So it could be the financiers, it could be the executive team that's overseeing this, it could be your direct supervisor, whomever has the stake in this project that you need to document and actually showcase on a regular basis. This living document that you're building allows you to showcase like, okay, I know you came to me with this idea or problem. This is how we're going to attack it. And then from that you can showcase cost, time, risk, and get really granular with, okay, This is how you wanted it to be solved. These are all the steps that are going to entail for it to be solved. This is the estimated cost to go with it. This is the estimated timetable based on this outline that I've set up for you to take a look at. It allows them to really get a visual understanding of what's going on, because with you just either presenting it or just talking about how this is all going to happen, it's very hard for people, for a stakeholder or people, anyone in general, to actually understand all the different variable granular steps that you're going to be taking in order to make sure this project happens. But if you show them a very detailed blueprint of this in a step-by-step hierarchical process, it puts them a little more at ease that you have a handle on this and that you really know what you're doing, so to speak. So it's great for explanation in one of those key documents that you can hand to a stakeholder and say, look, I got it. This is what's going to happen. Just make sure, and then have them either, if they need to green light something or if they need to approve something, or if it's just for their own peace of mind, they have it there for you. Now, when it comes to actually constructing the work breakdown strategy structure, however you want to pronounce it, but the WBS in general, there's certain rules that when you kind of put it together. The 100% rule is the first one and the true one that you always need to follow, which means that WBS should define the scope of the project entirely, all right? Which means like there can't be any stones left unturned and it has to actually finish up the project. If it doesn't do this, then the plans you create will have inference gaps and missing components. So if you don't actually have a very thorough 100% done and dialed, all the steps are followed, the end goal is made, all the things that go into it, WBS, you're going to have missteps and you're going to have gaps that are not going to get taken care of, which won't allow you to actually finish the project when you start to actually move through this. It's going to be mutually exclusive, all right, which means that there's not going to typically be any type of an overlap between any two elements because one element needs to get done before another one begins most of the time, all right? There are ways to build out. When we go into when I'm going to go into Gantt charts, I'm going to discuss how you kind of overlap certain parts of the project that have to be done at the same time and things this scenario. But for the most part, when you build out the WBS, you focus on whatever actionable steps need to get done in the specific order that they need to get done, and that's how you work with that. You make sure you include deliverables, not actions. So as far as like the outcomes are the most important part of the work breakdown structure, not the actual actions to come. So you're not going to put down, once this backdrop is done, they're going to start on artwork type situations. Like, no, once this is done, this has to be taken care of and finished. So you're always going to focus on the deliverables, not the common use of like actionable items that start. And last but not least, using common sense, right? Don't go into too much detail because that's not what this is for. It gives a very high level explanation, and it's mostly a tool for you yourself to use, but it's also great to actually explain to others or other stakeholders on the project exactly what's going to be happening. But you don't have to get super detailed and super I guess, descriptive with all these different things, just enough wording to understand and to keep you in the loop or keep you abreast, so exactly what these things are, so that way like, oh, this abbreviation means that to start here. Try not to use abbreviations, all right? So trying to like write out exactly what you need and any triggering sequences or words that are going to make you understand or remember exactly what that step entails. And then, of course, assigning accountability and all those different things that go with it. All right, so an example, and the one that we're going to use is more of an outline-based example, right? So the brief one I showed you earlier was kind of like more of I guess like a flow chart, so to speak, or kind of like a design arm. The easiest and tried and true method, and something that I typically like to use, is more of an outline Excel document because it's easier to change up. It might not be as visually stimulating and appealing, and it might not make your presentations pop, but with all honesty, the WBS is so more focused on you staying organized and being able to explain and understand where things go. So do whatever's more comfortable for you. So for me personally, and for most of the students that do these projects, and a very kind of unsexy, boring Excel document that goes into really extreme details of all the tasks associated with certain phases of the project seem to work really well. And the one that I have for you in the file section is this exact document that we're going to work through at the end of this lecture. But it allows you to assign accountability, which you assign to. It gives you the ability to add a start and end if you're able to do that or need to do that or have an idea of how this is going to work. And then any notes of additional description of that certain phase of the project. Whether you handed it to a vendor, whether it's essential, whether it's high importance, however you want to label it, make it. And then, like I said, WBSs are typically customizable to whatever your personal preference is for actually designing, building, and making these things happen, right? So, but many times companies will have proprietary ways or methods that, or even templates that they use for this as well because they are branding, so to speak. But most of the time, it's going to be your own Excel files. Like I've used the same type of Excel setups in most of my career when I created these or had to create these types of documents for organization and depiction. All right. So some more examples, because I never limit you as the students from exploring, or you may be versatile or have worked with like Project Manager, or you maybe have worked in Exosoft or some other types of softwares, or you potentially have some different graphic art that you can utilize and build out nice little templates or little kind of flowchart looking things and kind of make it a little bit more pretty, so to speak. And you are welcome to do that. I mean, if you want to make it more visually stimulating because you appreciate the visuals of that, or you think it's easier to explain to others when you kind of put it in depiction, you're more welcome to do that. Like I said, I was just stuck with the outline format because the Excels were easier to work off of, and I always took it for me because I could get a lot more granular, and I didn't really care about making it look pretty. It was more about the detail and explicitity that I could do with it. All right, but there's a bunch of different ways to do it. So now with that being said, I'll keep this lecture short and sweet so we can focus more on the actual creation of the WBS. So let me go ahead and grab the actual Excel document that's in your file section and bring it over, and I'll just kind of work through it a little bit. Okay, so pulled it over, and like I said, this is in your file section. You can download it. It's available to you, so pretty much use it at your leisure. I think I might have one or a few versions of this type of outline Excel setup, but you're more welcome to use this, or there are various other free softwares to create work breakdown structures, or like I said, there's Project Manager and a few other programs that if you're a little bit more versatile and understanding to, you're more welcome to do it that way, whatever your preference is. I have no, like, I guess, personal preference. Well, I do. I personally like Excel, but as far as like you submitting me work and showcasing what you want, I don't honestly care, just as long as you kind of detail what you need to for the personal project. So anyway, back to the diagram at hand. So if you are actually building out a work breakdown structure and using this specific document, right, you download it and you give it a name. You can change the dates, of course, because this is just a template. But then the leveling system in this is going to work a little bit more granular so you can kind of understand how it's going to affect. And this specific Excel doc that I have here for you, and with many WBSs, there's going to be levels of how these things are created, right? So a level 1 portion of the WBS, which you'll hear levels throughout my lectures and also when I discuss WBSs and even in your assignments, the various levels that you're going to work off of. It starts with certain levels, and typically WBSs go from like anywhere from a level, anywhere from like 3 levels to upwards of 10 to 15, depending on how many steps have to go into certain parts of the project. I always say don't get too crazy with it because that just makes more work for you to actually understand and know what's going on, and it makes it a lot easier to delegate if you can kind of make it a little bit more manageable. Anyway, long story short, but all right, so level 1 WBS portions of it start with like the faces, the overall portions of the project. Now, if you were creating, let's say, which you're creating a WBS for this Tough Mudder run, so let's put ourselves in that scenario, right? You're creating a WBS for that. One of the giant phases of being, responsible or ready for this would be, which typically is like physically ready for the run, right? So that would be probably one of the biggest task descriptions and one of the biggest levels that are there. Now, once you have this, you start to get many levels of exactly how that's going to work. So let's say physically ready to do the run. The first mini step that's going to go along with that is, let's say, getting a PT person, right? Personal trainer. May or may not want to do that, I don't really care. But I'm just saying, like, that's in there as one of the higher levels. Another one could be pretty much probably getting a doctor or just getting physically checked out in the first place, right? So getting a physical just to make sure that you actually can do whatever is going to be happening to you physically, right? So these would be some of the many things that would be physically ready, getting ready for the run. getting a PT person, getting a physical from a medical doctor to ensure that you're a clean bill of health and you actually can handle it. And then you can actually, now it can stop there and you can get rid of these additional levels here if you don't need to, or it can get even more granular with this, and like getting a PT person can start to turn into, getting, going to seeing PT person 4 times a week, right? And it can get you more granular to like splitting muscle groups, which I highly recommend when it comes to training in general. But that's not anything to do with this class. But so it starts to get kind of granular setup, and then so now we're into a phase where we've made not so much just a level 2, we've gotten into level 3s of what this goes into. And we can even go as more in depth as even level 4s, meaning the actual like exercises are getting a little bit more personal as far as like what is going to happen, getting blood drawn in the physical, things of that nature. But a lot of times you're going to most likely just these are going to either go away, or you can even change out the leveling system and add more level 3s. You can turn this one into a level 2, and then it'll adjust to you as well. It makes it really customizable, so you can actually assign what you need to. All right, so that's just a phase 1. All right, so let's get into it. And then assign to this specific project, of course, is going to be just you. Like you're not going to be assigning any of these tasks to other people typically, because you're the one that's going to be actively working on it. Now, in a work breakdown structure that has more moving parts and actual employees, you would be able to assign that to an individual, assign it to Bob, Steve, Hillary, whatever. And then you also can allocate starting and end dates. So physically getting ready for the run, there's going to be a starting and end date. And starting date maybe would be like today, right? Which you put today's date. And then the end would be probably the day before the run, or whatever that specific date is. And then you can make any notes that you need to. So you can get, like I said, really granular with this, and it's also very customizable. Like these drop downs adjust based on it. So if you wanted to change that to like a 5, it would instantly update the sequencing to that. Now you'll probably never get to a level 5 in this class because it's really not essential, and it's not, you don't need to go that deep. But definitely you're going to get to like level 2s and 3s with ease as far as the variances and the things that go into it. So we've done, one of the task descriptions. What would be now? If just think about it for a minute, and we can't discuss it because this isn't 100% live. But as far as another phase that would go into your description for getting ready for a Tough Mudder run, it could be because physically getting ready for the run is a big task portion of it. Maybe being mentally ready for that, and you can actually like go over what that would be. That could be, I don't know, getting going meditating to potentially do it. It could be, and then you could change it back to level 2 here, and getting mentally ready could also be building up your mental toughness. And you're asking yourself, how do you build up your mental toughness? Well, honestly, that's individual. So it's not like a course I teach. It's not something I really discuss as far as how to do that. But pushing yourself through certain thresholds. When it comes to when you do the running, the training, and kind of battling the elements, so to speak, it starts to build your confidence and mental toughness, so to speak, to push through that. So if any of you guys have done physically pushing activities, or even had children, maybe that's also a very mental tough venture. And if you are a parent, you know what I'm talking about. If not, you will at one point in time in your life. But anyway, but yeah, there's a bunch of different things that you can play with. And like I said, I don't set a really hard rhyme or reason to the task at hand. You could possibly even take out all of these and just do simply just one, if that is what you pretty much want to do. You can just delete these out and shift the cells up. Get rid of them. And you can take these all pretty much out, and you can just have one major task, and then just have many subtasks that go under it, which this type of activity may or may not have for you if you feel like that's the best route. But long story short, you document, you make it how it needs to, and you work through it as you take care of it and push it through. All right, so I just kind of ran through this as far as how you would do this personally. Now, just real quick, just so you know, and just to reiterate. Okay. So here's your class in a nutshell, right? Well, not in a nutshell. This is your actual class shell, right? This is, you may have a different setup of it as far as you're looking at it, but this is what you're looking at as far as your course, right? All the documents that you need, because I've had a few students ask me various questions about certain files. If you go in the files section, I have in here assignment examples. So, and I'll be updating these. Right now I just have the first 3 scenarios in there, but I'll be updating every single week as we go through. You can even look at a Tough Mudder example here from a student that put it together as far as how they attacked the gold card, how they built out their WBS, and they actually did 2 different versions of it based off of it, and then the risk metrics there. So you can take a look at how the whole assignment is transpired first. That's in the assignment section. But also, when you go into the, this, giant, massive bunch of stuff in there in general, there's going to be an area where you can actually find the work breakdown structure down here. And there's actually 2 different ones. There's a doc and then there's an Excel. I recommend using the Excel because it's a little bit more like how I just played with. The Word document you can also play with as much. You can work with as well depending on your process. But the Excel will allow you to do it through Excel as far as the drop downs and the different button pushing that I showcase for you. And that's going to be that. You can download it right from there. If you take the Word document, which like I said, you're more welcome to do it. I don't have a strict rule on how you handle that. It's going to look pretty, come on. It's going to look pretty similar, but it's going to be more of a, a Word document setup. So you're going to have to actually change out a lot of the outline view and portion of it and go with that. But I gave you 2 different versions if you want to do it next. If you feel more comfortable with Word or Excel, depending on how you want to do it. But if I have to kind of push you or give you a pleasant pushing of what's more of a preferable one, I usually always recommend Excel because Excel is is typically used a lot more in the private and professional sector, and the Excel document that we are playing with here is a lot easier to kind of navigate, and I've set it up so there's actual drop downs that you can customize it pretty easily and quickly through that. And then, of course, if you want to, you can always change out the color coding. You can make it look however you need to, and it can be done very, very quickly. So, anyway, with that being said, that's everything I wanted to cover for this specific week. And like I said, the key things that are going to be taken away and I want you to focus on when it comes to the assignment here for the Tough Mudder is creating a rudimentary gold card, using the risk metrics tool here, which is one of the most essential portions of it, and then creating a rudimentary WBS to include that will include your mitigation plan. So I want you to build me a WBS that kind of goes over what your mitigation is going to be as far as plan of action is concerned. And then if you need the examples, go to the file section, and I have a really, really well made assignment of the Tough Mudder from last semester. So take a look at how that's going to run. But for the most part, that's pretty much it for this week. I will turn over the rest of the class period that we have allocated for you to focus on creating these documents for me, and then week 3 next week when we start going over scope and high performing team and leadership in general, and we go over the choose your adventure situation and all the team issues that can come up in people's situations. I'll be back and I'll be doing instructing you guys live again, and then we'll just continue on. But if you need anything or have any questions, concerns, please feel free to send me an email message because I'll be on the blocks as much as humanly possible. I hope you enjoyed the recorded lectures and everything that you needed to look to, and I look forward to seeing you guys back next week.